By the spring of 1941, Britain was fighting alone. To survive, the island nation relied entirely on fragile cargo routes crisscrossing the Atlantic, carrying the food and military supplies necessary to keep the war effort alive. To choke off that lifeline, the German Navy deployed a ship designed to completely dominate those ocean routes. The Bismarck was the heaviest commissioned battleship in the world. She could push through the roughest weather at a steady 29 knots, carrying 8 massive 15-inch guns, all protected by an incredibly dense internal armor system designed to make her unsinkable. To defend those vital sea lanes, the Royal Navy relied on their own massive capital ships, anchored by the pride of the fleet, the mighty HMS Hood. But the Hood carried a fatal compromise. She was a battlecruiser, a vessel built during the First World War. To achieve her high top speed, her designers had deliberately sacrificed heavy deck armor. When these two giant ships finally found each other in the icy waters of the Denmark Strait, it would serve as the ultimate test for a century-old doctrine of traditional naval gunnery. Outgunned and out-armored, the British commander knew he had to push his ships as close to the Bismarck as quickly as possible. He wanted to avoid a tactic known as plunging fire. This is when an enemy elevates their guns like a howitzer, sending an artillery shell high into the air so it plunges almost vertically downwards, bypassing a ship's thick side armor and tearing straight through the vulnerable upper decks. But before the Hood could close the gap, a 15-inch shell from the Bismarck plunged straight through that thin deck armor, reaching deep into the bottom of the hull and igniting the ship's massive ammunition magazines. A blowtorch of flame erupted into the sky, and an almighty explosion ripped the giant steel warship completely in half. Within 3 minutes, the pride of the British fleet sank beneath the waves. Out of a crew of over 1,400 men, only 3 survived. News of the destruction caused absolute panic in London. The established rules of naval warfare had failed them. If the Bismarck was left unchecked to ravage the Atlantic supply lines, Britain would starve. The Royal Navy immediately stripped military escorts from their merchant convoys, throwing every available ship into the open ocean to hunt down the German vessel. The Bismarck had taken a minor hit during the battle that severed a fuel line, leaving a trailing slick of oil in the water. Even so, she was still heavily armed and highly dangerous. Knowing the British were tracking him with crude early radar systems, the German commander timed a brilliant evasive turn perfectly. He looped his ship back behind the pursuing cruisers during a brief gap in their radar coverage, completely vanishing into the darkness. For the next 30 hours, the British scoured thousands of square miles of empty ocean blind. Finally, an American-built Catalina flying boat spotted the rainbow sheen of an oil slick, and then the Bismarck itself. But the discovery presented a geographic trap. The Bismarck was steaming straight for the French coast. Within less than a day, she would be safely under the protective cover of Luftwaffe aircraft, and the British battleships were simply too far behind to catch her. Traditional sea power was no longer fast enough to dictate the terms of this battle. To stop the Bismarck, the British needed a completely different method of delivering firepower. The Navy turned to a desperate roll of the dice, a specialized task group called Force H, centered around the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal. From her pitching decks in the middle of a violent Atlantic gale, they launched a strike force of Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers. On paper, this was an absurd matchup. The Swordfish was a slow, open-cockpit biplane that looked completely obsolete, flying directly toward a modern battleship bristling with state-of-the-art anti-aircraft defenses. Yet their archaic canvas wings provided a hidden advantage. Armor-piercing cannon shells simply punched clean holes through the material without detonating. But to deploy a torpedo, pilots still had to fly a highly predictable straight line through a dense web of explosive flak. The most heavily armored, technologically advanced warship ever constructed in Europe was now fighting for its life against a squadron of slow-moving fabric airplanes. The final strike arrived in fading daylight, dropping down through heavy clouds and fighting against severe 55-foot ocean swells. The Bismarck had been engineered with incredibly effective anti-torpedo voids along its hull, allowing it to shrug off direct hits to its midsection. But one magnetic torpedo found the giant ship's single mechanical vulnerability. Striking the stern just as the Bismarck was attempting a defensive turn, the blast violently wedged the ship's massive dual rudders at a permanent 15-degree angle. In an instant, the ship's incredible armor and massive guns were rendered useless. She was paralyzed in the water, trapped steaming in endless circles. When dawn broke, the pursuing British battleships finally arrived to find their target helpless and unable to maneuver. They closed the range and opened fire. It was a completely one-sided execution. Huge 16-inch shells smashed into the Bismarck, quickly destroying her command bridge and silencing her main guns. The intense bombardment proved the sheer quality of the German engineering, as the core hull armor refused to yield for hours. But unsinkability could not preserve her ability to actually fight. Battered, burning, and eventually scuttled by her own crew, the Bismarck sank into the Atlantic, taking over 2,000 men with her. Hitler's surface threat to the convoy routes was permanently destroyed. The 9-day hunt signaled the end of the naval gunnery era. The massive battleships of the past had been outclassed by the range and speed of the aircraft carrier.